It was the second week of October 2017 when I decided to take a solo camping trip to clear my head. I had just turned 34 a week before. I was living alone in Carlisle, England, and things were quiet in my life. Too quiet. I'd gone through a breakup earlier that summer. Work at the garage had slowed down, and most nights I just stayed in watching whatever crap was on the telly. So I figured getting out into nature, breathing some cold air, and sleeping in the woods might shake things up in a good way. I'd always liked camping. Grew up going on trips with my dad when I was a kid. Nothing extreme, just weekends in the Lake District or out near Kielder Forest. This time, I wanted something a bit more remote. Somewhere quiet, but not too far to drive. After digging around on some old hiking forums and reading a couple posts, I found talk of an old trailhead deep in Northumberland, near a half-abandoned forestry site north of Audubon. A lot of guys said the road used to be used by loggers back in the 80s, but these days it was just overgrown and unused. They said it was good for wild camping since no one really passed through anymore. That sounded perfect to me. I packed my old two-man tent, some food, 2 thermal flasks of coffee, and enough layers to get through the cold. The forecast said light rain, maybe some wind. Nothing serious. I loaded up my car early on a Friday and set off around midday. The drive was mostly uneventful, though the last leg was on rough country roads that narrowed the further I went. I passed one small farmhouse after another, then just fields, and eventually it was just woods and a single-lane dirt track that looked barely used. I pulled over near a rusted gate with a sign that had long faded. The wood was cracked, and I could just about make out the word forestry under the moss. There was a gap where the gate had broken off, and past it, the old logging road stretched into the trees, covered in wet leaves and patches of mossy gravel. That's where I parked. I got out, stretched, looked around. It was already misty, the air damp and cold. Everything was silent except for the occasional crow and the distant rustle of wind through the canopy. I locked the car, shouldered my gear, and walked in. The path wasn't well-trodden, but I could still follow where the trucks had gone years ago. 2 parallel dips in the ground where tires had once worn ruts, now filled with puddles. After about an hour of hiking through trees and over fallen logs, I found a small clearing off to the right. The area was surrounded on all sides by thick pine, and the only way in or out was through the narrow logging road. It was perfect. Flat ground, a few mossy stumps to sit on, and just enough space for my tent and a small fire pit. I set up camp. The tent went up fast, something I'd done enough times that it felt automatic. I laid out my mat and sleeping bag, then started collecting some damp sticks and kindling. Took a while to get the fire going, but once it caught, it gave off a good, low heat. I sat beside it, sipping lukewarm coffee, my rain jacket zipped up to my chin, and just listened to the rain begin to tap gently on the leaves overhead. I didn't realize how long I'd been sitting there until the light started fading fast. The sun must have dipped behind the clouds long ago. Everything around me turned a deep gray, the kind you only get in forests when there's no moon and the sky's blanketed in thick rain clouds. I threw on my headlamp and boiled water for a packet of noodles. Quick. The rain had picked up now. Nothing torrential, but steady enough that I had to retreat under the tent's awning to stay dry. By around 9 p.m., it was fully dark. My fire was dying down, and the wind had started picking up. The trees creaked and swayed, and now and then a branch would snap in the distance and thump to the forest floor. I wasn't scared, not really. I'd camped alone before, but something about that place felt different. Not haunted or anything like that, just uneasy, like no one had been there for a long time, and maybe there was a reason for it. I chalked it up to nerves, told myself I was overthinking it. I zipped the tent shut, climbed inside, and laid back in my bag with the rain tapping steadily above. I must have dozed off at some point because the next time I opened my eyes, I had no idea how long it had been. My watch said it was 12:47 a.m. I laid there for a second, confused. Something had woken me up. I turned off my headlamp and listened. The rain was louder now, steady, heavy droplets beating down on the nylon tent. Wind pushed through the trees above, and I heard the occasional groan of a branch rubbing against another. But that wasn't what had woken me. It had been something sharper, something quick, a snap, not a branch falling, more like the sound of a stick breaking close by. Too close. I sat up, heart starting to thump a little now. My breath steamed in the cold air. I held it, listening harder. Then I heard it again. A crack, crunch, then another. Something or someone was moving through the woods near my tent. It wasn't a deer. I'd heard deer before. They move quick, light-footed. This was slower, more deliberate. The crunch of leaves, the squelch of a boot in mud. One step, then silence, then another. I turned my headlamp back on and grabbed the small camping knife I always kept next to me. Not that it'd do much, but it felt better than nothing. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out into the darkness. I couldn't see much past the rain and fog. My beam lit up the trees, the wet ground, the stump by the fire pit. Then something moved. A flash of shadow between two trees, maybe 30 feet out. Just a flicker. Could have been my eyes. But then I saw it again, closer this time. A figure, not tall, about average height, dressed in dark clothing. Not rushing, not hiding, just standing there. It killed my light. I sat frozen in the dark, my heart hammering so loud I thought whoever it was would hear it. No sound now. Nothing. Just the storm and wind and the dull roar of blood in my ears. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. I didn't dare make a sound. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to unzip the tent fully and step outside. My boots sank a little into the mud. I scanned the woods slowly with my headlamp. Every tree trunk a possible shape, every branch a silhouette. But there was no one there. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat on the stump, knife in my lap, waiting for the sky to start turning gray. And then I saw it. On the edge of the clearing, just off the old road, were footprints. Fresh ones, deeper than mine, bigger too. Someone had been standing there, watching me. I followed them a little ways, only a few yards before they vanished into the wet brush. The rain had softened them already, but they were real. I didn't imagine it. I packed up right away, tossed everything into my pack, collapsed the tent half sloppily, and bolted back down the trail. It was still dark, still pouring, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there. Every sound in the forest felt like it was chasing me. Every gust of wind felt like it carried something behind it. It took me almost an hour to get back to the car. The logging road was slick, and I fell twice, cutting my hand on a rock. I didn't stop to bandage it. I got to the car, threw the gear in the boot, and locked the doors as fast as I could. The windshield was fogged, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the keys. I drove off without looking back. That night stuck with me. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't see a face, didn't hear a voice. Nothing supernatural happened. But I knew someone had been there. Someone had followed me out into that forest in the rain, watched me set up camp, and waited until I was asleep. A few days later, I looked up more about that area, dug deeper into old local forums and news articles, found a post from a guy who claimed he and his brother used to hunt rabbits in those woods back in the late 90s. He said they once saw a man living in the ruins of an old ranger cabin, deep past where the road ends. A man who wasn't supposed to be there, said he wore army surplus and had set traps all around the forest. When they went back months later, the cabin was burnt out and empty. I don't know if it was the same person. Maybe it was just a hunter. Maybe someone squatting in the woods. But I'll never go back to that place. Not alone. not even in daylight. That trip changed something in me, not because of what I saw, but because of what I almost didn't. Someone was out there in that rain on that night, and if I hadn't woken up when I did, I don't think I would have ever known they were there until it was too late. Now, whenever I camp, even just in a regular park or near a lake, I always sleep light. I always listen, and I never, ever camp near old, forgotten roads, especially not on a rainy night. I was 34 when it happened. I'd been solo camping for almost a decade, mostly in Scotland and Wales, but sometimes in northern England too. I always preferred quiet areas far from tourist spots, somewhere you could breathe without hearing a phone ring or a dog bark. That August, I picked a spot I hadn't visited before, a small section of trail near Kielder Forest in Northumberland. It was one of those lesser-known loops just off the Pennine Way, not marked on most tourist maps. A local hiker I'd met online mentioned it casually once, saying it was peaceful and remote. That's all I needed to hear. I parked my car in a tiny village called Lanehead, locked it, double-checked my gear, and started walking. It was around midday. I'd packed light, just enough food for 2 days, a one-man tent, a lightweight sleeping bag, and my usual tools: water purifier, compass, small stove, and a knife I always carried on long treks. I left my phone in airplane mode to save battery, only using it to snap a few photos now and then. The first few hours of the hike were perfect. It was dry, with a low wind and occasional sun slipping through gray clouds. The trail rose and dipped through pine-covered ridges and rocky clearings. I passed no one, which didn't surprise me. This place wasn't on anyone's top 10 hidden hikes list or posted all over Instagram. That was the appeal. By late afternoon, I found a spot to pitch my tent. It was a little off the trail, tucked beneath a dense patch of trees, but there was a small clearing with enough flat ground for a tent. A stream wasn't far off either, close enough to hear it, far enough to avoid flooding if it rained. I dropped my pack, pitched the tent, boiled water for some dehydrated stew, and sat against a mossy tree trunk while eating. Nothing felt strange yet. I wasn't nervous. I'd done this dozens of times. But just before sundown, maybe around 7:30 p.m., I thought I saw someone walking through the trees about 60 feet uphill from me. Just a glimpse. I looked up and saw what I thought was a man, tall with a pale jacket or shirt, passing through a gap in the trees. He didn't look in my direction. He was moving slow, kind of dragging one leg. Not limping exactly, but dragging it like it wasn't working right. He disappeared behind the trees and didn't come back into view. It didn't unsettle me right away. I just assumed it was another hiker, maybe taking a shortcut or looking for a place to set up camp himself. That happens more often than people think. A few minutes passed, then I got up and scanned the hillside again. Nothing. The trees were too thick to see much anyway. I let it go. It wasn't illegal to camp here, and there was room enough for 2 tents if it came to that. By the time it got dark, I had forgotten about him. I zipped up my tent, crawled inside, and lay on my back reading a book under my small lantern. The air was cool but still. There were no strange sounds, just the normal rustling of the forest and the occasional chirp of insects. Eventually, I drifted off. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a soft thudding sound. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or badger moving through the trees. But after a minute or two, I realized the sound wasn't random. Came at a steady pace. 1, 2, 3, pause. Then again. 1, 2, 3. It sounded like slow footsteps, on dry ground, but not boots. The rhythm wasn't right. There was a dragging sound at the end of each third step. I sat up, switched off the lantern, and held still. My ears adjusted. The sound was definitely moving. It was off to my left, somewhere beyond the trees where I'd seen the man earlier. kept going for a while, then stopped altogether. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. I told myself it could have been anything. A wounded animal, maybe a branch falling at odd intervals, or even the echo of water dripping from a tree. I lay back down, but I didn't sleep again that night. I kept the knife beside me, just in case. By morning, the world looked normal again. Pale light filtered through the trees. Birds were singing. Nothing looked disturbed. I stepped outside, stretched, and checked my surroundings. No footprints, no snapped branches, nothing out of place. I decided to move on anyway. I didn't want to stay another night there. Something felt off. I packed quickly, ate a cold energy bar, and set off down the trail again, heading northeast. I figured I'd walk until I found a better spot, closer to the trail or maybe near one of the small forest roads marked on my map. I wanted to be around people again, even if just in earshot. By mid-morning, the trail crossed an old logging path. The map showed a minor road about 2 miles ahead. That became my goal. But about half an hour in, I got that feeling again, the sense of being watched. Every time I stopped, I thought I heard movement behind me. It wasn't loud or obvious, just the faintest rustle, followed by silence. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but after it happened 3 or 4 times, I stopped on a slope and turned quickly. There, far behind me and partially obscured by branches, was a man standing between 2 trees. He didn't move. He was facing me directly. Same pale jacket, same dragging posture. He stood in place like he was waiting. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I just stared. After maybe 5 seconds, I turned and kept walking. My heart was hammering in my chest. Every step felt heavier. My legs tensed up like I was walking through waist-high water. I didn't hear him following me, but I didn't stop again until I hit that narrow road. It was an old forestry road, more gravel than tarmac, but I felt safer just being on it. I walked another mile down it before finding a small flat patch near a rusted gate. There was an old farm building in the distance, half collapsed. I figured this was public land or abandoned property. Either way, I didn't care. I set up the tent again, but this time much closer to the road. That night, I didn't sleep. Every 5 minutes, I was checking the mesh window of my tent, looking out toward the woods. I kept the knife near my hand, my boots on, and the bag half-packed. At one point, around 11:30 p.m., I thought I saw something move along the tree line about 50 yards out. A faint blur of motion, like someone walking slowly between the trunks. Couldn't make out details. By sunrise, I was already packing up. I didn't bother boiling water. I didn't eat. I just walked the rest of the way back to the village. I got to my car by 10 a.m., peeled off my pack, and sat behind the wheel with the door locked. Then I noticed something I hadn't expected. There was a smear on the driver's side window, like a dirty handprint. Long, narrow fingers. Greasy. Faint, but visible in the morning light. The kind of mark you'd leave if you leaned in to look through the glass. I hadn't left it there. The car had been locked the whole time. No reason for anyone to come near it. That was it for me. I didn't report anything. What could I say? That a man watched me in the woods? That I heard footsteps? That someone might have looked inside my car? No crime had been committed. Still, I didn't go back to Kielder Forest. I haven't been back to that part of England since. I've camped since then, but never alone, and never in remote woods again. Now I stick to campsites with other people around. I carry a GPS beacon now too, something I never thought I'd need. Whatever that man was doing out there, he wasn't lost and he wasn't hiking. He was watching, and he was following. And I still don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed another night. My name is David, and I'm from Kansas. In 2019, I was 29 years old and working in construction, long days, hard work, basic pay. Back then, I had this thing about going off the grid for a weekend every couple months. I'd pack up my gear, get in my pickup, and drive hours into the middle of nowhere, pitch a tent, and just exist. No phone, no emails, no noise. Cleared my head better than anything else ever could. That year, I had set my sights on Utah. I wanted something dry and open. I'd been reading online about old desert trails used by ranchers back in the 1800s, places where people used to live but had long since moved away. I marked out a few general spots on a map and decided on a section of desert land about 60 miles southeast of Green River. No campsites, no signs, no services. Just flat land, rock, sand, and brush. A handful of dried creek beds and distant mesas were the only landmarks. That's what I wanted. Just me and the dirt. I left on a Friday morning in April. I'd packed enough food and water for 3 days. I had my .38 revolver in the glove box, not for people, just in case I ran into coyotes or something, and my gear in the back. By early afternoon, I was already deep into Bureau of Land Management territory, bouncing along gravel roads that barely deserved the name. Around 4 p.m., I reached a patch of land that seemed just right. The ground was flat, and the view was wide open. You could see all the way to the distant plateaus in every direction. No roads, no fences, no structures. Just dry brush and big sky. I parked my truck under the shadow of a rock outcrop and set up my tent about 50 yards from the vehicle. That first night was peaceful. No clouds, no wind, just cool desert air and stars you don't see in cities. I made a small fire, cooked a can of beans, and laid out in my sleeping bag with my back against a folded hoodie. I didn't sleep inside the tent that first night. Felt good being out under the sky. Sometime around midnight, I woke up suddenly. Not from a dream, just wide awake like my body knew something I didn't. There wasn't a sound. No wind, no insects, not even the crack of a cooling rock. Just pure silence. It was the kind of silence that puts weight on your chest. I sat up slowly, not moving much, and scanned the horizon. Nothing, just the outline of brush and distant ridges. But that silence, it wasn't right. Not even an owl or a breeze. Just cold stillness, like the desert had stopped breathing. I reached behind me and quietly pulled my revolver out of the folded hoodie where I tucked it for easy reach. I didn't unholster it, just held it. I told myself I was being paranoid, and after maybe an hour of sitting still, I laid back down. Eventually, I drifted off again. The next day passed normal enough. I spent time hiking short distances, tracking dry stream beds, climbing a low ridge to the west to get a better look around. I found an old cow skull half buried in a wash. Probably been there years. Nothing unusual. I took a few photos, ate jerky, and spent most of the afternoon carving wood with my pocket knife just to pass time. That second night, I set up the tent again but kept the rainfly off. I wanted to see the sky. I built a small fire again and read a little from a book I had in my pack. The moon was almost full, and the desert looked silver in the pale light. Everything cast long shadows. Around 1 a.m., I woke up again. This time I knew why. Something had crunched the gravel near my tent. I didn't sit up fast or make noise. I laid there, still as possible, and listened. The sound came again, one step, maybe two, then silence. Not the scamper of a coyote or the slow scrape of wind dragging a stick. It sounded like a foot, a human foot. I slowly, carefully reached for the revolver. It was still beside me under the hoodie. I wrapped my hand around it, took the safety off, and stayed still. Another step. I was fully awake now, heart pounding. I kept thinking, maybe someone had gotten lost? Maybe a ranch hand? But that made no sense. I was over 20 miles from the nearest cattle fencing, and no roads nearby. Nobody would be walking out here, not at night, not without light. not without calling out. I stayed there for maybe 10 minutes. No more footsteps, just 1 or 2 crunches in the gravel, then nothing. I should have gone outside to check, but I didn't. I stayed in the tent with my hand on the gun, eyes wide, ears straining. I couldn't sleep after that. By sunrise, I was outside, circling the tent slowly. The gravel and dust didn't hold clear prints, just scuffs. But there was a spot where the dirt looked different, like something heavy had stood there for a few moments and then moved on. Nothing else.
No boot prints.
No paw marks. I spent most of that day feeling uneasy. I kept scanning the ridges and the brush line. I kept my revolver on my hip the entire time. I didn't hike. I didn't do anything really. Just stayed close to the tent, listening, waiting. That third night, I moved the tent closer to the truck. I thought about packing up, but I didn't want to be the kind of person who runs because of a noise. I forced myself to stay. I figured I'd finish the weekend like planned, then leave early Monday morning. I lit no fire that night. I kept the tent zipped. I loaded the revolver and sat inside the truck for an hour before going back to the tent. The moon was full now, and I could see almost everything in black and white clarity. Around 3 a.m., something touched the side of the tent. Not a breeze, not a brush or leaf. Pressed in gently but wide and flat, like the palm of a hand. Then it moved along the fabric, slow and steady, from front to back. Not pulling, just feeling. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I held the gun close and counted the seconds. The pressure lifted. Silence. Then I heard a sound I still can't describe properly. It was like someone imitating an animal badly. A broken noise, like a dog's bark mixed with a man trying to howl through water. Muffled but close. Came from maybe 10 feet away. Then again. Same broken noise, like a voice that didn't fit its body. I stayed in the tent until sunrise. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. I sat there with the revolver pointed at the flap, waiting. As soon as light hit the sky, I packed everything. Threw it all in the bed of the truck without care. Tent still half-staked. Sleeping bag rolled once and tossed in. I didn't eat, didn't brush teeth, didn't take photos. Just slammed the door, started the engine, and drove. On the way back, I passed one of the old cow skulls again. Except now it was crushed, like someone had stepped on it or hit it with a rock. Not just broken but flattened. The area around it looked disturbed. A few rocks out of place, a circle of scuffed dirt like something had crouched there for hours. I didn't stop again until I reached Green River. I sat in the gas station parking lot for nearly half an hour, staring into nothing. I wanted to believe I had overreacted, that maybe it had been a coyote brushing the tent, that maybe the sounds were just wind and brain tricks, but I couldn't make myself believe it. I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. I went home and didn't say anything to anyone. Not at first. Not until a few months later, when I read a forum thread about strange things seen in the Utah desert. People talking about tall figures moving through brush, about strange sounds at night, about seeing what looked like a person, until it moved in a way no person should. They called it a skinwalker. I don't believe in myths or monsters. I never have. But I do believe something was out there with me. Something that stood on 2 legs and watched from the dark. Something that waited until I was alone and still. Something that could mimic sound but not well. Something that wanted me to know it was close. That it could have come into the tent if it wanted. I've never gone back to the desert. I still camp, but only in forests now. Near people, near noise, near roads. Whatever I saw or didn't see, out there near Green River, it wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a man. And it wasn't something I ever want to see again. I was 34 when I decided to take a week off from everything and go camping by myself in early September of 2017. The summer was fading, and the kids were back in school. I figured the parks would be quieter. I was living in Cincinnati at the time, and after looking at a few maps and forums, I settled on heading to the Mark Twain National Forest in southern Missouri. I didn't want a campground with toilets and fire pits. I wanted real quiet. The kind of quiet you only get miles into the woods, away from everything. I packed my gear carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, cookware, knife, flint striker, first aid kit, compass, topo map, power bank, headlamp, and my old .38 snub nose I kept locked away at home. I had never fired it outside a range, but I always brought it when I camped alone. I had enough experience hiking solo to know that it wasn't bears or mountain lions I should worry about. It was people. The drive took most of the day. I remember passing a small gas station with a broken Pepsi sign that buzzed faintly in the heat and dust. It was the last place I saw another person. A kid at the counter asked if I was going down near Ashwood, and when I said yes, he just nodded and rang up my jerky and water without another word. I drove another 45 minutes after that until I reached the forest access road, which was really just a hard-packed dirt lane half covered in weeds. From there, I hiked about 6 miles off-trail through the thickest woods I'd ever been in. Oaks, hickories, and a few pines packed so tight you could go 20 feet and feel like you hadn't moved at all. I reached the clearing late in the afternoon. It was perfect. Flat, dry, and sheltered on 3 sides by a slope and heavy trees. There was a small stream about 50 yards downhill. I pitched the tent, boiled some noodles, and sat against a log watching the sun go down. I didn't start a fire that night. I was too tired. I just crawled into my sleeping bag and passed out with the sounds of cicadas buzzing through the trees. The first night went by fine. It was chilly and a bit windy, but nothing unusual. I woke early, made coffee, and hiked around for hours, following deer trails and using my compass to stay oriented. Around midday, I found an old fire ring deeper in the forest. It was surrounded by broken glass, beer cans, and what looked like some kind of burned-up chair. Probably teenagers, I thought. Still, it made me uneasy. It was too far from any road or trail. I marked it on my map and turned back. The second night I made a fire, mostly just to feel normal again. That part of the forest was so dense that even the sound of my fire crackling didn't carry far. It was like the trees swallowed every bit of sound. As I sat there eating my beans, I got this strange feeling like I was being watched. It didn't come on fast. It was slow, building like pressure in the air. I turned the headlamp on and swept it around the trees. Nothing, just bark and leaves and that wall of black beyond the beam. Still, I kept the fire going a bit longer and stayed awake until close to midnight. When I did finally crawl into the tent, I slept light. Every little rustle outside made my heart beat faster. But I told myself it was just squirrels, maybe a raccoon. That made sense. I even convinced myself that I was just jumpy because of the garbage site I found earlier. But when I woke up the next morning, something was off. At first, I thought it was just the light, too dim for how late it was. Then I noticed the tent's zipper was open about 6 inches at the bottom. I never leave it unzipped. Never. I sat up and checked my pack. Everything was there. Knife, gun, gear. Nothing missing. No tracks outside the tent either. Just the usual forest floor, disturbed from me walking around. I figured maybe I hadn't zipped it fully. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the wind shifted it. I zipped it back up and pushed the thought aside. Still, I kept the gun closer that day. I didn't hike far. I stayed near camp, mostly gathering wood and trying to shake off the unease. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard something out in the trees to the east. Heavy steps. Not constant, just a few crunches. Then silence. Then more. Spaced apart like someone was trying to move quietly but didn't know how to walk in the woods. I froze and stared into the trees for a long time. I couldn't see anything. No movement. But the sound came again. Crunch, then a pause, then crunch crunch. I shouted something without thinking, then realized what I'd done. I never shout in the woods. I hate even talking out loud when I'm alone out there. I couldn't take the silence anymore. The steps stopped. I stood there with my back to the tent for 10 minutes. When nothing else happened, I went back to the fire pit and sat down. That night, I kept the gun in my sleeping bag. I zipped the tent all the way up, locked it from the inside, and tied the zipper pull to the mesh with a loop of cord, just in case. I barely slept. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard something out there. When dawn came, I got out fast. I started to boil water and saw something odd about 30 feet from my tent, right near the trees. There were footprints in the dirt. Not deep ones, just partial tracks in the thin layer of dust and leaves. Bare feet, adult-sized. They came from the trees, circled the tent once, and disappeared back into the woods. I didn't move for a long time. Then I packed up. Not all my gear, just the tent, bag, food, water, gun. I left the cookware and a few other things behind. I needed to move fast and light. I didn't feel safe heading back the way I came. Whoever was out there might know that route. Instead, I turned north, toward a logging road I remembered seeing on a map. It was supposed to be rough and unused, but it would get me out faster if I moved fast. I hiked hard all day, barely stopping to drink. The woods were endless. I felt like every branch held eyes. The sun dropped behind the hills before I found the road. It was overgrown and half washed out, but I followed it anyway. I walked with the gun in one hand, the flashlight in the other. Around dusk, I saw something that stopped me cold. A blue tarp, maybe 30 yards into the woods, pulled tight between two trees. Not old and shredded like a hunter's blind, but fresh, clean edges. I crouched down and watched it for 10 minutes. Nothing moved, no sounds. Then a flicker of motion, a shadow inside. I backed away slowly, keeping trees between me and the tarp, then turned and walked fast up the road. I walked for hours. Around midnight, I heard a truck engine, far off, but steady. I followed the sound and eventually came out near a gated entrance with a rusted sign, Riverside Timber Management. I climbed the gate and didn't stop walking until I hit a blacktop road just after 2 a.m. I flagged down a passing delivery truck around dawn. The guy didn't ask many questions, just gave me a ride to a diner near Salem. I called a buddy to come get me from there. I never went back to that forest. I never checked if anyone else had reported strange things around there. I don't even know if what I saw was a person or something else, but it doesn't matter. It was real. I felt it. I saw the tracks. I saw the tarp. Someone was out there. I've camped since then, but never alone and never off-grid. I sold the tent. I keep the .38 closer now, even at home. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I think about that footstep outside the tent. That slow, quiet step of someone who wasn't in a hurry. Someone who had all the time in the world to wait. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. I was 32 the summer I decided to get away from everything for a while. I'd been working long weeks at a metal fabrication shop in northern Indiana, and even though the money was all right, the hours were brutal. It wasn't just the work. I'd been going through a quiet kind of burnout that didn't look like falling apart, just slowly drying out. I had a couple of weeks saved up and figured I'd take some time off in early July, before the real heat set in. I didn't want beaches or cities. I didn't want company. I wanted to be alone in the woods where the air smelled like bark and dirt and the sky went dark without all the light noise. Somewhere quiet. I spent a couple of days scanning forums and maps and eventually settled on a rough plan to camp along a stretch of forest near Route 29 in southern Illinois. It wasn't an official park, but it had miles of woods and old access roads, and a few guys on a backcountry forum said they'd done solo hikes out there with no problem. I loaded my old Tacoma with gear, a tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, food, and all the little things I might forget later. I had a hunting knife strapped to my thigh and a crowbar wedged behind the seat. Not because I expected trouble, but because I'd rather have them and never need them. I told my buddy Marcus I'd be off the grid for a few days and gave him a general area on the map. Just a precaution. I set out on a Tuesday morning. It was already warm by the time I turned off the main highway onto a cracked old access road, which slithered its way through thick groves of trees and low green hills. I kept driving until I found a wide dirt clearing that looked like it hadn't been used in a while. No tire tracks, just dried mud and flattened grass. I killed the engine and got out. The only sounds were birds, insects, and the faint creak of trees shifting in the breeze. I hiked a bit deeper in before setting up camp. I wanted to be out of sight from the road. I found a patch of level ground about 200 yards from where I parked and pitched the tent under a ring of tall trees. There were no trails, no fire pits, nothing that suggested regular use. Just me, the woods, and silence. The first day passed easy. I walked a few miles around the area, tracked some deer trails, found a slow creek. The forest was thick, but not choking. Visibility stretched maybe 20 or 30 feet in all directions. Felt remote, peaceful. That night, I cooked some canned chili and lay back listening to the wind push through the trees. I slept hard, deeper than I had in months. But the second night was different. It started with a feeling. I just turned in, the fire reduced to soft red coals outside the tent. I wasn't fully asleep yet, just listening. And somewhere out in the dark, I heard it, a low, rhythmic rustling. Not the kind of scatter a rabbit makes or the crunch of branches under a deer's hooves. This was slower, heavier, like footsteps but drawn out and careful. I stayed still, holding my breath. I didn't unzip the tent. I just listened. The sound would come for a few seconds, then stop. Then nothing. Then again 2 or 3 slow steps. Then silence, too far off to make out clearly, but close enough that I could hear the pattern. Then nothing at all. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or something, maybe a bear, though that was unlikely for the area. I kept the knife close and didn't sleep much. The next morning I walked the perimeter, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. There were no tracks that I could find. But the weird thing was, something had moved my gear. Nothing was stolen, but the camp stove was turned around. Not knocked over, just turned. My water jug was a few feet from where I'd left it. Again, not spilled, just moved. I stood there for a long time, looking at those small, stupid details, and tried to think of a reason why I would have moved them myself. Maybe I'd done it after dark and forgot. Maybe, that afternoon, I took my pack and walked a few miles deeper into the woods. I thought about cutting the trip short, but it didn't feel right. I come here to be alone, to push past whatever had been gnawing at the edges of my life back home. Some part of me didn't want to admit I was spooked. But that night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was past midnight when I woke up. The forest was still, too still. No wind,
No crickets.
just a thick, waiting silence. I don't know what woke me. Maybe instinct, maybe sound. I lay on my back, heart thumping, staring at the roof of the tent. And then I heard it. Faint scrape just outside. Then another. Then a light, measured pressure against the fabric wall near my feet. Like someone pressing their fingers through the tent slowly. Not clawing, not shaking, just pressing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The pressure lingered a few seconds, then stopped. Then the same motion came again, this time along the side of the tent, dragging slowly across from the middle to the back. I grabbed the knife. The sound stopped. I sat there for what felt like an hour. Then I snapped on my flashlight and unzipped the tent in one motion, blade in hand. Nothing. Just trees and the soft red glow of the coals outside the ring. I scanned the trees. My light caught nothing unusual. No eyes, no figure, just the motionless dark. But I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I'd decided to leave. I packed quickly. There were no footprints.
No Thorn Fabric.
No sign of anything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched me. Something that knew how to stay just far enough away. I loaded the truck and drove down the same road I came in on. The forest was quiet as I left it behind. I hit pavement about 20 minutes later and stopped at a gas station near a farming town. As I stood by the pump, I checked the bed of the truck and saw something I hadn't noticed when I left. A single rusted padlock sitting on the tailgate. Not mine. It was old, the kind you see on barns or storage sheds. Scratched, corroded, but intact. I hadn't brought it. I would have seen it while loading. It wasn't there before. I stood there staring at it for a long time. Later that week, I looked up old news articles from the region. Just out of curiosity. I found nothing recent, but there was one article, dated 15 years earlier, about a small, unregistered cabin out in the woods near Route 29. It had been raided after neighbors reported strange behavior. A man in his 50s had been living off-grid for years. They found journals, traps, knives. No confirmed crimes, but he was taken in for psychiatric evaluation. The kicker? The cabin was about 2 miles from where I'd camped. I don't go camping alone anymore. Not in areas that quiet. Not where people don't go. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed one more night. If I hadn't unzipped the tent when I did. If I hadn't left that morning. I never figured out who left that lock in my truck. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about the fingers pressing slowly into the fabric. Careful, testing, and I know it wasn't an animal. I was 33 years old when I took a solo camping trip that I still can't stop thinking about. It was September of 2017, early fall, when the Colorado air was beginning to get colder, and the leaves had just started changing into those sharp yellows and burnt oranges. I'd been going on solo camping trips for almost 10 years at that point, usually once every few months whenever I needed to reset my head. I liked the silence. I liked how the woods didn't ask anything of me. I liked waking up in a tent and not hearing a single car. That year, I was working in Fort Collins and had been pulling 60-hour weeks for a while. The work pressure was insane. I'd been breaking out in rashes, barely sleeping, eating fast food, and snapping at people. I needed a break from everything. No phone, no news, no traffic. Just trees, dirt, firewood, and time. So I took 5 days off work and drove west into Roosevelt National Forest. I didn't go to any of the official campgrounds. I found a narrow trail, Ridge Trail number 918, a small hiking path I'd seen before but never followed fully. It wasn't well known. No signage, no markers, just a thin path of flattened earth with weeds brushing both sides. I parked about a mile down from where the trailhead begins. Left my old Jeep Cherokee pulled onto some gravel off the main road. I packed light. A tent, tarp, fire starter, sleeping bag, my folding knife, a pot, a few meal packs, trail mix, a stainless steel bottle, flashlight, extra batteries, and a GPS device that I turned off to save power unless I needed it. I didn't bring a gun. I never did. I'd always relied on my instincts and never had trouble before. The hike was slow at first. The trail was overgrown but not dangerous. Dry pine needles and soft dirt padded every step. After about 2 hours uphill, I found a small open area that looked good, flat ground, surrounded on 3 sides by tall evergreens, and a little stream down about 40 yards away. It was perfect. I set up my tent under a slight overhang of trees, cleared the fire pit, laid down my gear, and got everything organized like I always did, neatly so I could find things in the dark. I remember sitting on a fallen log that first evening, just breathing in the cold air, watching the wind knock yellow leaves loose from the trees. The first night went like it always did. I lit a small fire, cooked one of the meal packs, and lay in my sleeping bag with my headlamp and a paperback until I got tired. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a light rain tapping the tent. It stopped before sunrise and I went back to sleep. By the second day, things felt good. I spent hours walking around the ridge, not straying far, just exploring the perimeter and checking out the slope of the land. I marked my path with small rock piles, like I always did, so I could trace it back. I didn't see or hear anyone.
No planes, no engines, no voices.
Just birds and wind. It was sometime late that second afternoon that I started to feel off. It was a subtle shift. Not something I saw, not a sound, just a feeling. The air felt different, like the woods had paused, like the wildlife around me had gone quiet. I stopped on the slope I was climbing and looked around. Everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, old logs, sky. But something felt wrong. I suddenly got the urge to return to camp. I turned around and walked back quickly. No panic, just focused movement. I followed the rock piles I'd made. It only took maybe 20 minutes to get back to camp, but when I got there, something looked different. At first I didn't see it, but after standing there for a few seconds, I realized the small tarp I'd stretched over my firewood pile had been moved. It wasn't where I'd placed it. I crouched down and checked it. The logs were still there, but the tarp had clearly been lifted and tossed back down. Not blown by the wind, shifted by hand. I stood up slowly and scanned the tree line. Nothing. No movement, no sound. But something in my gut twisted hard. I didn't light a fire that night. I ate trail mix cold in the tent, and I kept my flashlight in my hand the whole time. I zipped the tent up and lay there, listening. Every snapping branch outside sounded like footsteps. I kept telling myself it was just deer, maybe a raccoon, but that feeling didn't leave. Around midnight, I heard something that didn't match any animal noise. It was a thud, a dull, flat thud, not a branch falling, not something random. It sounded like a boot hitting the ground, deliberate, heavy, and it was close. I sat up fast. My heart was pounding. I turned off my headlamp so I wouldn't give myself away. I waited, listening hard. 30 seconds passed. Then another sound, softer this time, like fabric scraping. Then nothing. I stayed frozen for maybe an hour. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off in and out of light sleep. But I never really relaxed. The next morning, everything outside looked the same. Tent untouched, supplies in place, but the tarp was missing, gone completely. I stood there trying to think. I walked the immediate area for maybe 30 yards in each direction, scanning the ground. No sign of the tarp, no footprints, but the ground was mostly needles and leaves. Nothing that'd hold a clean print. Something had taken it. At that point, I debated packing up and heading back. But I was pissed. I felt like someone was messing with me, and I didn't want to retreat. I wanted to know who or what was out here. I stayed a third night, but this time I didn't sleep in the tent. That evening, I packed up my gear quietly and moved about 50 yards uphill behind a thick line of trees. I laid my sleeping bag under a pine canopy and sat silently, facing my own campsite from the distance. My goal was to stay hidden and watch, see if anyone came back. I sat there for hours in the dark, the cold creeping into my legs, my back cramping up. But I kept watching. The fire pit was barely visible in the dark, but I could still make out the outline of the tent from the moonlight. Sometime after midnight, I saw it. A figure moved into the clearing. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, human, walking upright. No light, no sound. It moved straight to my fire pit. Couldn't breathe. I was holding my body completely still. The figure bent down. I heard a rustling. It stood again and moved over to the tent. It didn't unzip it, it just stood there, watching it. After maybe 2 minutes, it turned and walked back into the trees on the far side. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun was up, I packed everything as fast as I could. But when I got to the tent, I saw what it had left behind. A long, thin piece of rope was laid neatly across the entrance, not tied to anything, just placed there perfectly straight, like someone wanted me to know they'd been there. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop for food. I didn't even eat that morning. I threw everything into my bag and hiked out fast, skipping the trail markers I'd made, cutting straight downhill through underbrush. I got back to my Jeep and drove until I hit a gas station in a town called Estes Park. I sat there for over an hour with the door locked, just staring at the windshield. I never reported it. What would I even say? There was no real crime, no threat, just quiet signs, little things that added up to something very wrong. Since then, I haven't camped alone again. Even now, 8 years later, I still think about that figure. The silence, the rope, the tarp that vanished. And the part that gets me the most? They didn't take anything. They didn't destroy anything. They just watched. And that feels worse than anything else. I was 31 when I decided to take that trip. It was October 2017, and I had some time off from work in Nottingham. My job as a delivery manager was draining, and I'd been on edge for months. Everything felt tight. My chest, my jaw, even my hands when I slept. So I figured I'd head out on my own and camp for a few nights somewhere quiet. Somewhere far from the traffic and constant pressure. I remembered this old spot from when I was about 15. My uncle had taken me there for a weekend in the woods, deep in Derbyshire, not far from Matlock. The place had once been a scout camp in the 70s, long shut down when I first saw it. Back then, the cabins were already falling apart, roofs sinking in, floors soft under your boots. But the area around it, thick trees, silence you could almost hear, stayed in my mind. I don't know why. I guess because it was one of the few peaceful memories I had from that time. So I packed up a borrowed rucksack with my gear. Tent, sleeping bag, water, dried food, knife, torch, and a few extra things. I brought a small hand axe, mostly for firewood. The plan was to hike in and camp near the old abandoned scout buildings for 2 nights. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not because I was trying to be secretive, just because I didn't think I had to. I parked in a lay-by off a narrow back road late on a Friday morning. From there, I walked into the woods, following the overgrown trail I remembered. Most of it was still there, just harder to see. Fallen branches and wet leaves covered everything. I kept walking for about 2 hours, moving deeper into the forest. Eventually, the trees opened up into that same clearing. The sight of it made something in me tighten. The camp was still there, or what was left of it. A handful of rotting wooden buildings sat in a half circle, their sides warped, their roofs sunken and covered in moss. Nettles and weeds were waist-high in some areas. A rusted swing frame stood at the edge, no seats left. It all looked worse than I remembered. There was no sign of anyone for years. No footprints, no trash, no broken beer bottles like you'd expect. Still, I felt good. No traffic noise, just wind in the trees and the crunch of my own boots. I set up my tent about 20 meters away from the closest cabin, close enough to see it through the trees, but not right next to it. I made a small fire pit using some old bricks from a collapsed chimney and gathered dry wood for later. The first night was cold but fine. I made pasta on my camp stove and sat by the fire as the sun dropped behind the trees. There was no signal and I didn't care. I felt okay just sitting in silence for once. I heard owls and the distant creak of trees shifting in the wind. Nothing strange. I went to sleep sometime around 10. The ground was hard and sloped, and I kept waking up. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard something moving through the trees, but I figured it was a deer or fox. The area's full of them. I didn't get out to look. The next morning, the first odd thing happened. When I walked over to the nearest cabin just to look around, I found what looked like fresh marks in the dirt beside the entrance. They weren't deep, but something had been dragged. Not an animal, more like a boot or a piece of gear. I knew I hadn't been there the day before. I stared at the ground for a while, just trying to figure it out. There were no clear boot prints, just scuffs. I thought maybe a badger had dug around. I didn't see anything else, so I shrugged it off. Still, that unease stayed with me. I spent most of the day hiking further into the woods, trying to see if there were other buildings beyond the ones I remembered. I found a collapsed latrine shack and what might have been an old food hall, all crumbling. The roofs were half-eaten by rot, and moss grew thick across the sides. At one point, I found a pile of rusted old tent poles and canvas under some leaves. It looked like someone had stashed gear there decades ago and never came back. When I got back to my tent in the late afternoon, I found the zip on the front half open. That stopped me. I never leave it open. I zipped it fully when I left. Always did, even just for a short walk. I knelt and looked inside. Nothing was missing. My gear was where I'd left it.
Sleeping bag, tårer til, food, bag.
Nothing moved, at least not that I could tell. But I had this heavy feeling settle over me. Something was off. That night, I barely slept. I kept the fire going longer than before. I listened hard to the woods around me. Every crack in the branches sounded closer than it should have. Around midnight, I turned off my lamp and lay still, listening. The forest was too quiet. Even the owls seemed to have gone. I started to hear footsteps, real ones, slow, uneven, crunch, pause, crunch. I lay there frozen. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like someone barefoot or in socks. No crunch of boots, no snap of sticks, just that soft drag of feet through damp leaves. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My heart pounded so hard it hurt my ears. The footsteps stopped just outside the tent. I could hear breathing, not animal breathing, slow human breathing, controlled, like someone trying not to make noise. I reached slowly for my knife, but the zipper sound would have given me away. I waited. I don't know how long I lay like that. 10 minutes, maybe more. Then I heard the steps move away again. Not fast, still slow, dragging. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just waited for dawn. By the time the sky turned gray, I felt like I'd aged 5 years. As soon as there was light, I crawled out and looked around. Nothing. No prints, no signs. The forest looked just like it had the day before. But I knew someone had been there.
I paket fast.
No fire, no breakfast. I shoved my things into the rucksack and left the tent behind. I didn't want to go near the buildings again, but I had to pass near them to reach the trail back. As I got closer to the largest one, the one I'd walked past the day before, I saw something that stopped me. A coat, hung on the door frame. It was too new, modern, dark green like a waterproof shell, not something that had been left here for decades. I hadn't seen it yesterday. No way I missed it. I didn't go near it. I backed away and moved fast toward the trail. I kept looking over my shoulder every few minutes. My ears felt like they were tuned to everything. Every shift in the branches, every bird. I didn't relax until I got back to my car. When I finally got home that evening, I locked every door and window and sat there for hours, just thinking. There are no ghosts in that place, but someone's out there, living near those ruins. Someone who doesn't want to be found. And I realized later I had never once thought about who actually owned that land. Maybe it was private. Maybe the camp never shut down completely. Or maybe someone moved into those cabins after they were abandoned, living off the grid. But they were there. That much I know. They didn't take anything, didn't speak, didn't chase me, but they watched me, and they wanted me gone. I've never gone back. I've told a few people over the years. They usually laugh or shrug, say it was probably a hiker. But no hiker moves through wet woods in socks in the middle of the night. No hiker watches your tent without a word. Sometimes, when I walk alone in any woods now, I still get that feeling in my spine. That quiet, that heavy silence where the birds stop, and you just know you're not alone. I learned my lesson. The forest isn't haunted, but that doesn't mean it's safe. Not because of monsters or stories, because of people, real ones. And the scariest thing is they don't need a reason. They're just there, waiting, watching, and they know those woods better than you ever will.